Okay. Next up, we're going to start digging into this data a little bit more closely. So this is a time where I think it's probably more prudent for you guys to just kind of sit back and like watch it to understand the concept rather than trying to follow along. Okay. So I want to show you two key differences between the information that you're seeing in the series and the information that you see in the points that are generated by this cell grid. So let me grab another panel. I'm going to put it here. So what we have are kind of these giant lists, right? So what we've got that is kind of interesting, I think, is a bunch of points, right? You know, 3 values for the x, the y, and the z. And at first, up here, it kind of looks the same, right? So it's just a giant list with 23 items. And then after that, it's a giant list of a lot more than 23 items, but it continues onto a new group of 23 items. So that is what's called a grafted list, okay? And we're going to talk a lot about data trees, but data trees are structured to organize data that you can, you know, sort of create relationships between certain groupings of information. And I'm just going to show you this so you kind of understand what's going on, but I'm going to pull out the param viewer, and I'll plug that in, draw tree, and then this guy, that, and draw tree. Okay, so basically this guy looks like this, and this one looks like that. Okay, the difference is that in the top one, you have one list of data that has one branch. Okay, and the other one, you've got one list of data that was generated that's creating a whole bunch of branches. So that's like where it starts to get really complex, and that's where you need to focus most of your energy in understanding this software, because this is the stuff that's going to hang you up the most, is whether or not you have a flattened list, which is like the top one, or if you have a grafted or branched data tree, like the bottom one. But we're also going to look at like how that information gets structured, I guess, in terms of like seeing the indices, right? All the various index values for these items. So I'm going to go to display, and let's go to point list. And you guys don't have to do this, but I do want to show you it. I'm going to put that on here, and then I'm going to put a slider, 0 to 5.0-ish there. And this is going to allow me to see the numerical values of each of these points. Okay, so this is how it's organized. Every single one of these columns is numbered from 0 to 23. Okay, and there's a very good reason why it starts from 0. That has to do with the fact that we're doing visual programming. Okay, so that comes from programming language where all lists start from a value of 0. Okay, it's just something you got to get used to. So 0 to 23, and if we wanted to modify that list, we can flatten it. If we wanted to, we can make it read as one giant list by right-clicking on point and going to flatten. So now all those numbers are counting this giant list of 575 points counts all the way up to 575 in the top right corner here. Does that make sense? So that is now you have a visual of the difference between those two trees. But when you go back to the param viewer, plug it in here, draw the tree, now that's all it is. Okay, so that's a super flattened list. Okay, so the other thing is when we have this data structured, even when it's not flattened like this, the information is read in a very particular way. So it's read in columns. But if you want to switch it so that it's not reading in columns and it reads in rows, then you can flip the matrix of that data, and it just flips it around. So flip matrix, and this is, in case you're curious, located under sets and tree. That's where all the data mapping stuff is. And we're going to plug it in here, and then plug that in there, and here. And now it's reading the other way. Does that make sense? So now the zeros are in the column, and the numbers are counting up in the row direction. Okay, why is that important for you? It's important for you because you're going to have information that you're trying to map in a particular direction across a set of items, and you're going to need to control whether or not it's going this way or that way, often. So the good thing is, and what you're starting to realize, I think, is that like this is kind of like a quadrilateral operation. Most of what we do is all done in quadrilaterals. So that's kind of one of the focuses of this class is precisely that, but not everything is a quadrilateral. But anyway, there's more to it than that. Okay, so we've got this list that has all these different numerical values, but we also have cells. And cells are going to come in packs of 23 as well. So it's actually reading as a rectangle, and every single one of them is going to come in the same sort of list. So down to 23. Okay. So the difference here is that a cell can either just be read as a cell. So there's the geometry. Where was that? Rectangle, right? And we can plug that in there, and that's just a rectangle. It's drawn out of curves. Or it can actually be a surface. So if I plug the surface into there, then it creates a surface with that rectangle. Okay, so it really gets like super easy, super fast to do something super simple like this. But let's go back to, actually let's keep it as a surface. Let me kind of move this aside. Let me pause real quick and see, before I move into like the individual cell stuff, what questions do you have about the grid numbering and grouping? No questions? Sinking in though? Makes sense to you? Okay. Now, so we also have surfaces, right? So these surfaces, we have 529 separate cells. If I want to work on, say, one cell, I have to isolate that cell. And I can do that pretty easily. Actually, this probably should be a separate video. I think this should be a separate video. I'm going to stop this one, and then we'll go into isolating cells, because that's like a whole other, conversation.